The morning sun streamed through the blinds as Tasha Wilson packed the last of her presentation materials into her carry-on bag. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m., perfect timing. Her flight to Chicago wasn't until 9:45, but after 15 years of business travel, she lived by one rule: always arrive early. Tasha checked her phone one last time, confirming her digital boarding pass was still there in the airline's app. The familiar blue and white logo of National Airlines glowed back at her. All the details in order. Flight 2187, Seat 14A, Chicago O'Hare. She checked in yesterday evening, wanting to avoid any last-minute hassles. "You got this," she whispered to herself, slipping her phone into her jacket pocket. At 34, Tasha had climbed her way up to become one of the top marketing executives at her firm. Today's presentation to potential investors wasn't just important for the company. It was a chance to showcase the strategy she'd spent months developing. The rideshare arrived outside her apartment building right on time. Tasha settled into the back seat, exchanging polite small talk with the driver before turning her attention to mentally rehearsing key points from her presentation. The city was just waking up as they drove through the streets, streetlights still glowing against the dawn sky. "Airport drop-off, right?" the driver asked, pulling up to the departure terminal. "Yes. Thank you," Tasha replied, gathering her things and stepping out into the cool morning air. Inside the terminal, the usual bustle of travelers filled the space. Families herding sleepy children, business people tapping away on laptops, airline staff moving with purpose. Tasha joined the line for security, her boarding pass pulled up on her phone and ID in hand. The line moved steadily, and she found herself appreciating how smoothly things were going. The big presentation was causing enough butterflies in her stomach without travel complications. When Tasha reached the front of the line, she handed her ID to the first security agent and held up her phone, showing the digital boarding pass. The agent compared her face to her ID photo, handed the card back with a nod, and waved her through to the airline checkpoint. That's when the smooth morning hit its first bump. The airline staff member, a man whose name tag read Paul, took an unusually long time studying her digital boarding pass. He frowned, tapped at the screen a few times, then looked up at Tasha with narrowed eyes. "There seems to be a problem with your boarding pass," Paul said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to glance over. Tasha remained calm. "What kind of problem?" she asked, reaching for her phone. "I checked in online yesterday." Paul pulled the phone closer to his face, scrutinizing the boarding pass. "This doesn't look right," he said, his tone shifting from professional to accusatory. "The barcode isn't scanning properly, and there's something off about the formatting." Tasha took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I used the airline's app to check in. Everything looked normal to me. Could you try scanning it again?" Paul attempted another scan, but his expression only hardened. "Ma'am, I think you're trying to board with a fake boarding pass." The words hung in the air. Tasha felt a flash of heat rise to her cheeks, aware of the curious glances from other travelers. In 15 years of flying for business, no one had ever accused her of something like this. "That's absurd," she replied, maintaining her composure despite the shock. "I'm a frequent flyer with National. I've used this app dozens of times. There must be a technical issue with your scanner." Paul shook his head. "Our scanners are working fine for everyone else." He gestured toward the passengers who had moved through smoothly before and after her. "I need to call my supervisor." As Paul stepped away to make the call, Tasha noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The travelers before her, a middle-aged white couple, had shown paper boarding passes that received barely a glance. The man after her, a young white professional in a suit, had his digital boarding pass scanned without issue. The different treatment was subtle but unmistakable. Tasha checked the time, 8:15 a.m. She still had plenty of time before her flight, but this unexpected delay was eating into her carefully planned schedule. More concerning was the growing knot in her stomach. She'd faced subtle biases throughout her career, learned to navigate them with grace while standing her ground. But being publicly accused of fraud was a new experience. A small crowd of travelers had begun to form behind her, some sighing or checking their watches as the bottleneck grew. Tasha felt exposed under their impatient gazes as if she were on display. "I'm sorry for the delay," she said to no one in particular, attempting to diffuse the tension. A few people offered sympathetic smiles while others avoided eye contact altogether. Paul returned with his supervisor, a woman in her 50s with a permanent frown etched between her eyebrows. Her name tag read Linda. "What seems to be the problem here?" Linda asked, addressing Paul rather than Tasha. "This passenger is attempting to board with what appears to be a fraudulent boarding pass," Paul reported, speaking as if Tasha weren't standing right there. "The barcode isn't registering in our system." Linda turned to Tasha, her expression already set with judgment. "Ma'am, our system shows no record of your booking." Tasha pulled out her phone again, this time opening her email. "I have my confirmation email right here, along with the receipt for my payment. I booked this flight 3 weeks ago." She held out the phone, showing the confirmation email with all the flight details clearly visible. Linda gave it a cursory glance but remained unconvinced. "Anyone can create an email that looks official," she said dismissively. "Our system is what matters, and it's not recognizing your boarding pass." The implication was clear, and it stung. Tasha felt her professional demeanor being tested, but she kept her voice level. "I understand there's an issue with your system," she said carefully, "but I am not trying to board with fraudulent documentation. I'm a marketing executive heading to Chicago for an important client presentation. I've been a loyal customer of National Airlines for years." Linda's response was curt. "Everyone has an important reason to travel, ma'am." The dismissive tone pushed Tasha to be more assertive. "Could you please check your passenger manifest for today's flight to Chicago? My name is Tasha Wilson. I should be on there." Linda sighed but stepped over to a nearby computer terminal. She typed with sharp, impatient keystrokes, her frown deepening. "There's no Tasha Wilson on this flight," she announced after a moment. "That's impossible," Tasha insisted, pulling up her banking app. "Look, here's the charge from National Airlines 3 weeks ago. The money left my account. I have a confirmation number." She showed Linda the banking transaction, but the supervisor merely shrugged. "I can't explain the charge, but you're not in our system for today's flight. Perhaps you're confused about the date or you booked with another airline." The suggestion that she couldn't keep track of her own travel arrangements felt like salt in the wound. Tasha watched as other passengers continued to move through the checkpoint without issue. A sense of isolation crept over her, that familiar feeling of being singled out without justification. "I'm not confused," she said firmly, "and I'm not lying about my booking. There must be a problem with your system. Could you check again, please? Or perhaps we should speak with a manager." At the mention of a manager, Linda's demeanor shifted slightly. She exchanged glances with Paul, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "That won't be necessary," Linda said quickly. "Let me check one more thing." As Linda returned to the computer, Tasha noticed a young woman at another counter, looking over in her direction with a concerned expression. The woman, whose name tag identified her as Zoe, seemed to be listening to their exchange while helping another passenger. Linda returned, her face now showing the first hints of uncertainty. "What was your confirmation number again?" Tasha read it from her email. Linda typed it in, then paused, her eyebrows rising slightly. "And you said your last name is Wilson?" "Yes, Tasha Wilson," she confirmed, a flicker of hope rising. Linda typed something else, then frowned at the screen. "There's a Tasha Wilson in our system, but the boarding pass isn't activating properly. There seems to be some kind of error code associated with your ticket." Before Tasha could respond, Zoe approached them. "Excuse me, Linda, but we've been having issues with the new scanner update this morning. Several digital boarding passes aren't reading correctly. I just sent out an alert about it." Linda's expression tightened. She clearly didn't appreciate being contradicted by a younger colleague, especially in front of a passenger. "That doesn't explain why her name didn't show up in my initial search," Linda replied stiffly. "Actually, it might," Zoe persisted. "The system update is affecting how passenger names sync between the app and our main database. IT mentioned that too." A tense silence fell between the airline staff. Paul shifted his weight uncomfortably from one foot to another. Tasha stood perfectly still, unwilling to break the moment that seemed to be turning in her favor. Finally, Linda turned back to Tasha. "We'll need to verify your identity further before we can let you through. Please step aside to the customer service desk." It wasn't an apology, but at least they were no longer openly accusing her of lying. As Tasha followed Linda to the desk, she checked the time again, 8:40 a.m. The entire exchange had taken nearly half an hour, and her carefully planned buffer time was rapidly disappearing. What should have been a routine security check had turned into something that left her feeling exposed and diminished. As they walked, Tasha couldn't help but wonder how differently this situation might have played out if she'd looked like the travelers who had passed through without issue. Behind them, Zoe caught Tasha's eye and gave her an encouraging nod. It was a small gesture, but in that moment it meant everything. Tasha stood at the customer service desk, her hands resting on the cool counter surface as Linda typed with sharp, angry keystrokes. The hustle of the airport continued around them, announcements echoing overhead, the squeak of luggage wheels on polished floors, hurried footsteps of travelers rushing to gates. For Tasha, though, time seemed to slow down, each minute stretching as she watched the clock on the wall tick closer to her boarding time. "I need to see some additional identification," Linda said, not looking up from her computer screen. Tasha reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license, passport, and company ID badge. She placed all three on the counter, sliding them toward Linda. "Will these work?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her. Linda picked up each item, examining them with exaggerated scrutiny. She held the passport up to the light, checking for watermarks as if she suspected it might be counterfeit too. "These appear to be in order," Linda finally admitted, though her tone suggested she was disappointed not to find a problem. "But that doesn't explain the issue with your boarding pass." Zoe, the younger airline employee who had mentioned the system update, approached the desk with a tablet in hand. "I think I might be able to help," she offered. "It just sent over instructions for manually verifying passengers affected by the glitch." Linda's mouth tightened into a thin line. "I'm handling this situation, Zoe." "I understand," Zoe replied carefully. "But they specifically asked us to use this workaround for any passengers experiencing boarding pass scanning issues. It's affecting several flights this morning." A small crowd had gathered behind Tasha, other travelers with various issues waiting for assistance. Some were checking watches or phones, sighing impatiently. Others watched the exchange with undisguised curiosity. Tasha felt their eyes on her back, adding to the discomfort of the situation. A tall man in a business suit stepped up to the counter beside them, completely ignoring the line. "Excuse me," he interrupted. "I'm about to miss my connection. Can someone help me?" Without hesitation, Paul stepped forward. "Of course, sir. Let me assist you right away." Tasha watched as the man was immediately helped, his issue, a seat change request, resolved in less than 2 minutes. The contrast was stark. No verification of multiple IDs, no accusations of fraud, no being made to wait while supervisors were called. She took a deep breath, tamping down the flare of anger. This wasn't the time. She had a presentation to deliver, investors to impress. She couldn't afford to let this situation derail her focus. "My flight board's in 30 minutes, Tasha said calmly. "I've provided all my documentation and confirmation details. Is there any way we can resolve this quickly?" Linda didn't respond immediately, still frowning at her screen. Zoe, however, stepped closer. "If I could just try the manual verification process," she suggested again, addressing both Linda and Tasha. After a moment of tense silence, Linda finally nodded curtly. "Fine, go ahead." Zoe smiled reassuringly at Tasha. "May I see your confirmation email again, please?" Tasha handed over her phone. Zoe quickly typed the confirmation number into her tablet, then scanned the barcode on Tasha's digital boarding pass with a handheld device she pulled from her pocket. "Here we go," Zoe said after a moment, turning her tablet so both Tasha and Linda could see the screen. "The reservation is definitely in the system. Tasha Wilson, seat 14A to Chicago. The issue is just with how the barcode is displaying in our scanning system." Linda leaned forward, examining the screen with reluctant interest. "That's strange. When I searched earlier, nothing came up." "It's because of the system update," Zoe explained patiently. "The IT memo says it's affecting how names are indexed, especially for passengers who checked in through the app last night during the maintenance window." The explanation hung in the air. Linda didn't immediately respond, and Tasha wondered if she would acknowledge the mistake or simply move on as if nothing had happened. "Well," Linda finally said, "I suppose there was a technical issue after all. It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as Tasha suspected she would get." She watched as Linda's fingers moved across her keyboard, her face set in concentration. "I'll need to reissue your boarding pass," Linda said. The digital one won't work properly with our gate scanners until IT fixes the problem. Thank you, Tasha replied, relief washing over her. She checked the time again, 9:15 a.m. Her flight would begin boarding soon, but it looked like she would make it. As Linda printed a paper boarding pass, a man in a crisp uniform approached the desk. His name tag identified him as Raymond Chen, customer service manager. Is everything all right here? He asked, his gaze moving between Linda, Zoe, and Tasha. Yes, sir, Linda replied quickly. Just a technical issue with a boarding pass. It's being resolved, Zoe cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Chen, this passenger was initially accused of presenting fraudulent documentation. We've confirmed it was just the system glitch affecting mobile check-ins from last night. Tasha appreciated Zoe's honesty. Too often, she'd seen similar situations swept under the rug. The harm already done but never acknowledged. Mr. Chen's expression became serious as he turned to Tasha. I apologize for any inconvenience or distress this situation may have caused you. Ms. Wilson, this is not how we treat our passengers, especially our frequent flyers. His apology seemed genuine, which took Tasha by surprise. She hadn't expected anyone in authority to acknowledge what had happened. Thank you, she said, accepting the newly printed boarding pass from Linda. I appreciate that. May I ask how long you were delayed here? Mr. Chen continued. Tasha glanced at her watch. About 45 minutes now. Mr. Chen frowned. That's unacceptable, especially given the circumstances. He turned to Linda. Please upgrade Ms. Wilson to first class and issue a voucher for our lounge. Linda's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded and began typing again. That's not necessary, Tasha began, but Mr. Chen shook his head. It's the least we can do, and I'd like to speak with you further about your experience today if you're willing. We take these matters very seriously. There was something in his tone that told Tasha he understood exactly what had happened, that this wasn't just about a technical glitch or poor customer service. It was about something deeper, something that happened all too often to people who looked like her. I would appreciate that, Tasha said. Accepting the first-class boarding pass and lounge voucher Linda reluctantly handed over. Mr. Chen handed her his business card. Please email me when you return from your trip. I'd value your feedback on how we can improve. Zoe stepped forward. Your gate is B17. I'll walk you there to make sure there are no issues with the new boarding pass. As they left the customer service desk, Tasha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The situation had been resolved, but the emotional toll lingered. 45 minutes of being treated like a criminal, of being doubted and dismissed, had left her feeling drained. I'm really sorry about what happened, Zoe said quietly as they walked. I saw how they were treating you compared to other passengers. Thank you for speaking up, Tasha replied. It made a difference. I wish I had spoken up sooner, Zoe admitted. I've seen this kind of thing happen before. Some of the older staff. She trailed off, then shook her head. It's not right. They reached gate B17 just as the pre-boarding announcement was being made. The flight was on time, and despite everything, Tasha would make it to Chicago with enough time to prepare for her presentation. You should be all set now, Zoe said. Gesturing toward the gate, Tasha nodded, then paused. Can I ask you something? Why did you help me? Zoe looked surprised by the question. Because it was the right thing to do, and because my mom always taught me to speak up when I see something wrong. She smiled slightly. She's a civil rights attorney. I grew up hearing about cases like this, people being treated differently based on how they look. Your mom sounds like an amazing woman, Tasha said. She is, Zoe agreed. And she would have been a lot braver than me today. I should have said something as soon as I saw how Paul was treating you. You did speak up, Tasha reminded her. And it helped. That matters. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers echoed through the gate area. Tasha checked her new boarding pass and gathered her carry-on bag. Thank you again, she said to Zoe. You turned a terrible situation around. As she joined the boarding line, Tasha took a deep breath. The incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, bringing up feelings and memories she usually kept carefully compartmentalized while navigating professional spaces. But now, as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who scanned it without issue, Tasha made a decision. When she returned from Chicago, she would take Mr. Chen up on his offer to discuss what had happened. Not just for herself, but for the next person who might stand at that counter, facing those same biased assumptions. The first-class seat was a small consolation for what she'd experienced. But as Tasha settled in, she found herself grateful for the extra space and privacy. She needed this time to refocus her mind on the presentation ahead, to push aside the morning's events and recenter on the reason for her trip. As the plane began to taxi, Tasha opened her laptop. She had work to do, investors to impress. She wouldn't let what happened at the airport undermine her confidence or derail her purpose. She'd faced bias before, would likely face it again. Each time she emerged stronger, more determined. But the incident wouldn't be forgotten. When the time was right, she would address it. For now, though, Chicago and her waiting audience took priority. The plane touched down at Chicago O'Hare with a gentle bump, rousing Tasha from her focused preparation. She'd spent the 2-hour flight reviewing her presentation slides and rehearsing key talking points, letting the work push the morning's unpleasant encounter to the back of her mind. But now as the aircraft taxied toward the gate, flashes of what had happened kept resurfacing. The accusatory tone in Paul's voice, Linda's dismissive attitude, the stares from other passengers. Tasha took a deep breath, gathering her belongings as the seatbelt sign turned off. Being in first class meant she'd be among the first passengers to deplane, another small blessing after the chaotic start to her day. She checked her watch, 11:30 a.m. local time. Her presentation wasn't until 2 p.m., which gave her enough time to get to the hotel, freshen up, and center herself before facing the potential investors. "First time in Chicago?" asked the older gentleman who'd been seated next to her, breaking into her thoughts. "No, I come here for work pretty often," Tasha replied with a polite smile. "Well, it's a beautiful day out there. Not often we get such clear skies this time of year." Tasha glanced out the window at the crisp blue sky. It was indeed a beautiful day, and she felt a sudden urge to reclaim some joy from this trip. "Thanks for pointing that out. I needed the reminder to appreciate the good things." The man nodded, seemingly pleased with the exchange as they both rose to retrieve their bags from the overhead compartments. As Tasha walked through the terminal, phone in hand to order a ride to her hotel, it buzzed with an incoming email. She paused near a row of seats to check it, expecting something from her team back at the office. Instead, she saw a message from National Airlines. Subject: apology and follow-up regarding your experience today. Curious. She opened it immediately. "Dear Ms. Wilson, I wanted to reach out personally following the unfortunate incident at the airport this morning. As the customer service manager who spoke with you briefly, I wish to extend my deepest apologies for the treatment you received. What happened today falls far short of our service standards and our values as a company. I've initiated a full review of the incident, including examining our check-in systems and staff training protocols. If you're willing, I would greatly value the opportunity to discuss your experience in more detail upon your return. Your perspective would be invaluable as we work to ensure such situations never occur again. Wishing you a successful business trip. Sincerely, Raymond Chen, Customer Service Manager, National Airlines." Tasha stared at the screen, genuinely surprised by the follow-up. In her experience, these kinds of incidents usually ended with token apologies and nothing more. The fact that Mr. Chen had taken the time to email her personally and so quickly felt significant. She typed a brief response, thanking him for reaching out and agreeing to meet when she returned. As she sent the email, Tasha realized that the knot of tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders had loosened slightly. Being heard, having her experience acknowledged, it mattered more than she'd expected. The rideshare arrived promptly, whisking her through Chicago's downtown to the Lakeview Hotel, where the investors' meeting would be held. The gleaming glass and steel building reflected the clear blue sky as they pulled up to the entrance. "Good luck with whatever brings you here," the driver said as Tasha gathered her things. "Thanks. I think I might need it today," she replied with a small smile. Inside the hotel lobby, Tasha spotted several people in business attire clustered near the reception desk. She recognized one of them, Henry Thompson, the lead investor she'd be presenting to. He was deep in conversation with 2 women she didn't know, their discussion seemingly intense. Tasha considered approaching them but decided against it. Better to get settled first and collect herself. The morning's events had left her more rattled than she wanted to admit, and she needed a moment of quiet before switching into presentation mode. After checking in and freshening up in her room, Tasha headed down to the hotel restaurant for a quick lunch. She still had about an hour before the meeting, just enough time to eat something and review her notes one last time. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, mostly business people in suits engaged in animated conversations. Tasha found a small table in the corner and ordered a salad and iced tea, spreading her notes beside her plate as she ate. "Ms. Wilson?" Tasha looked up to see a woman standing beside her table. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. "Yes, that's me," Tasha replied, trying to place the woman's face. "I'm Diane Reynolds, Henry Thompson's deputy at Meridian Investors." She gestured to the empty chair across from Tasha. "Do you mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Tasha said, quickly gathering her notes to make room. Diane sat down, fixing Tasha with an appraising look. "I wanted to touch base with you before the formal meeting. I've read through your proposal several times, and I have to say, it's one of the most innovative approaches I've seen in quite a while." The unexpected praise caught Tasha off guard. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I particularly like how you've integrated sustainability metrics into the core strategy, rather than treating them as an add-on. That's the kind of forward thinking we're looking for." Tasha nodded, relaxing slightly as they fell into a discussion about the marketing strategy she'd developed. Diane asked sharp, insightful questions that allowed Tasha to highlight the strengths of her approach. As they talked, Tasha felt her confidence rebuilding. This was her element, discussing ideas, defending strategies, painting a vision of what could be. "You know," Diane said after a particularly detailed exchange about market penetration strategies, "I had to fight to get your proposal on today's agenda." "Really?" Tasha asked, surprised. "Why is that?" Diane's expression became measured. Some of the old guard at Meridian can be traditional in their thinking. They tend to favor working with established names, companies with long track records. She paused. "Companies run by people who look like them." The implication was clear, and Tasha felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had standing at that airport counter, the knowledge that she was being judged by different standards. "But," Diane continued, her voice firm, "I've been pushing hard for us to diversify our portfolio, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's smart business. Fresh perspectives lead to better outcomes. Your proposal is proof of that." Tasha studied Diane's face, seeing genuine conviction there. "I appreciate your support, and I plan to prove you right." "I'm counting on it," Diane replied with a smile. She glanced at her watch. "We should head up soon. The meeting room is on the 15th floor." As they rode the elevator up, Tasha felt a curious parallel between her morning at the airport and what Diane had just shared. In both situations, she'd faced barriers that had nothing to do with her abilities or actions. But in both cases, someone had recognized the injustice and taken steps to address it. Zoe and Mr. Chen at the airport, Diane at Meridian Investors. The meeting room was already half full when they arrived. Henry Thompson stood at the head of the table, his imposing figure commanding attention as he greeted each person. When he spotted Tasha and Diane entering, he raised an eyebrow slightly. "Ah, I see you two have already met," he observed as they approached. "I wanted to discuss a few points from the proposal before we got started," Diane explained smoothly. Henry nodded, turning his attention to Tasha. "Ms. Wilson, welcome. We've been looking forward to your presentation." "Thank you for the opportunity," Tasha replied, shaking his hand firmly. As the room filled with the remaining investors and executives, Tasha set up her presentation at the computer. She noticed a few curious glances, a few whispered comments. As the only black woman in the room, she was used to being noticed, to standing out whether she wanted to or not. But today felt different. The morning's confrontation at the airport had stirred something in her, a renewed determination, a sharper focus. If she could handle being publicly accused of fraud, standing her ground until the truth emerged, then she could certainly handle presenting her ideas to this room of investors. When Henry called the meeting to order and introduced her, Tasha stood with quiet confidence. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present, including those who had seemed dismissive when she entered. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today I'm going to share a marketing strategy that challenges conventional approaches and delivers measurable results across multiple metrics. As she spoke, Tasha could feel the energy in the room shifting. The initial skepticism from some quarters gave way to interest, then engagement. By the time she reached the core of her presentation, the innovative approach that Diane had praised, even the most reserved faces showed signs of being impressed. When Tasha opened the floor for questions, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. The very executives who had initially seemed dismissive now leaned forward with thoughtful inquiries. She answered each one directly, drawing on her deep knowledge of the market and her confidence in the strategy she'd developed. An hour later, as the meeting wrapped up, Henry approached her with an extended hand. "Impressive work, Ms. Wilson, truly impressive. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're very interested in moving forward." The words were exactly what Tasha had hoped to hear, but somehow they felt like more than just professional validation. After a day that had begun with being doubted and dismissed, ending it with recognition and respect felt particularly meaningful. As the room cleared, Diane lingered behind. "You knocked it out of the park," she said with a genuine smile. "But somehow I'm not surprised." "Thank you for your support," Tasha replied. "It means more than you might realize, especially today." Diane tilted her head curiously. "Rough morning?" Tasha considered how much to share, then decided on honesty. "Let's just say I was reminded that some people still make assumptions based on how you look, rather than who you are or what you can do." Diane nodded, understanding immediately. "Well, for what it's worth, you just changed some minds in this room today. That's no small thing." As they walked out together, Tasha felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her professional success, lingering frustration from the morning's incident, and a growing resolve to address what had happened when she returned home. The evening sky had turned a deep purple by the time Tasha left the hotel. After the presentation, Henry Thompson had invited her to join the investment team for dinner, a clear sign that her proposal had been well received. The meal had gone wonderfully. Flowing conversation, thoughtful questions about her strategy, and even some genuine laughter. By the time dessert arrived, it felt less like a business meeting and more like a celebration. Now, walking back to her hotel room, Tasha allowed herself to fully appreciate what she'd accomplished. Despite the chaotic start to her day, she had managed to impress a room full of skeptical investors. The preliminary paperwork was already being drafted. Meridian was prepared to commit significant resources to her marketing campaign. As Tasha swiped her keycard and entered her room, her phone buzzed with a text from her boss back home. "Just heard from Henry. You knocked their socks off. Call me when you get a chance." Tasha smiled, setting her laptop bag down and kicking off her heels. It felt good to be recognized for her work, to have her ideas valued and her expertise respected. The contrast between her treatment this morning at the airport and her reception at Meridian wasn't lost on her. Both experiences had happened on the same day, to the same person. The difference was in how others chose to see her. After changing into more comfortable clothes, Tasha stepped out onto the small balcony of her hotel room. Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky, the wind off Lake Michigan carrying a refreshing coolness. She took a deep breath, letting the tension of the day slowly release from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification, another message from Raymond Chen at National Airlines. "Dear Ms. Wilson, I hope this message finds you well and that your business meeting was successful. After our brief interaction this morning, I took the liberty of reviewing the security footage from the check-in area. What I saw was deeply concerning and has prompted immediate action from our team. I want to assure you that this matter is being taken very seriously at the highest levels of our organization. If you're still willing to speak with me upon your return, I believe your insights could help inform meaningful changes to our training and procedures. Again, my sincerest apologies for what you experienced today. Regards, Raymond Chen." Tasha read the email twice, a mix of emotions washing over her. She hadn't expected the airline to actually review security footage or take concrete steps beyond the obligatory apology. The fact that Mr. Chen had followed up so diligently suggested he genuinely recognized the gravity of the situation. She typed a quick reply, confirming that she'd be willing to speak with him after returning home. As she hit send, Tasha wondered what exactly he had seen in that footage. Had it made clear what she had felt instinctively, that she was being treated differently than other passengers? that assumptions had been made about her based solely on her appearance, her thoughts were interrupted by a call from her boss. Tasha answered, ready to share the good news about Meridian's response. "There's my star presenter," her boss exclaimed as soon as she picked up. "Henry called me personally to rave about your pitch. Said it was the most impressive presentation they've seen in years." "It went well," Tasha agreed, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "They're already drawing up the paperwork." "This is huge for us, Tasha, absolutely huge. When do you get back?"
"We need to celebrate."
"Tomorrow afternoon," she replied. "My flight leaves at 11. Perfect. Team lunch on Friday? I want everyone to hear about this win directly from you." After confirming plans for the celebration, Tasha ended the call and sat on the edge of her bed, feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. The professional victory was significant, worth celebrating. But the morning's incident at the airport still lingered in her mind, a reminder of the challenges that persisted despite her accomplishments. She pulled out her laptop, suddenly struck by an idea. Opening a new document, she began to type, recording the details of what had happened at the airport while they were still fresh in her mind. She documented everything: Paul's initial suspicion, Linda's dismissive attitude, the way other passengers had been processed without question, while she was pulled aside and accused of fraud. The writing was cathartic, allowing her to process the emotions she'd pushed aside to focus on her presentation: anger at the unfair treatment, frustration at having to defend her basic integrity, gratitude for Zoe's intervention and Mr. Chen's response. All of it poured onto the page in clear, detailed prose. When she finished, Tasha sat back and reread what she'd written. The account was factual but powerful, capturing both the incident itself and its emotional impact. Without consciously planning to, she'd created something that felt important, a record that might help others understand the small indignities and larger injustices that people like her often faced. On impulse, she opened her social media account and began to compose a post. She hesitated briefly, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Sharing such a personal experience publicly wasn't something she did lightly. As a professional, she'd always been careful about her online presence, keeping it positive and largely work-focused. But something about today's experience felt different, important, worth sharing. She began typing, adapting her private account into a public post. She kept the airline's name anonymous, focusing instead on the experience itself, the assumptions made, the different treatment observed, the impact it had on her. She ended with appreciation for the staff members who had recognized the situation and taken steps to address it, emphasizing that accountability and change were possible. Before she could second-guess herself, Tasha hit post and set her phone aside. It was done. Her experience was now out there for others to read, reflect on, and perhaps recognize in their own lives. Sleep came easily that night, the combination of emotional and professional exertion having thoroughly exhausted her. When Tasha woke the next morning, she felt refreshed and ready to return home. The successful presentation and the difficult airport encounter both behind her, or so she thought, until she checked her phone. Her social media post had gone viral overnight. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, dozens of shares. Many of the comments were from people sharing similar experiences, thanking her for putting words to something they had faced but struggled to articulate. Others expressed shock or disbelief that such treatment still occurred. And there, among the flood of responses, was a comment from an unexpected source. As the colleague mentioned in this post who witnessed this incident, I can confirm every word is true. It's time for our industry to do better. I'm committed to being part of that change. Tasha stared at the screen, genuinely surprised. She hadn't named the airline or any of the staff in her post, focusing solely on the experience itself. But Zoe had somehow found it, read it, and publicly aligned herself with Tasha's account. That small act of solidarity felt immensely meaningful. As Tasha packed her things and prepared to check out, her phone rang with an unknown number. Curious, she answered. "Ms. Wilson? This is Patricia Reynolds, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience at National Airlines." The woman's voice was crisp and professional. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, not at all," Tasha replied, surprised to hear from someone so high up in the company. "I've been briefed on the incident you experienced yesterday, And I've also seen your social media post, though I understand you were considerate enough not to name our airline directly. Tasha waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. I want to personally apologize for your experience and to thank you for sharing it so eloquently. Your post has sparked an important conversation within our leadership team. I appreciate that, Tasha said carefully. Raymond Chen mentioned you've agreed to speak with him when you return. I'd like to ask if you would be willing to expand that conversation to include myself and our Director of Diversity and Inclusion. We believe your insights could help us address systemic issues more effectively. The request took Tasha by surprise. She had expected at most a perfunctory meeting with Mr. Chen that would lead to vague promises of looking into it. The involvement of senior leadership suggested the company might be taking this more seriously than she had anticipated. Yes, I would be willing to do that, Tasha agreed. Thank you. Your flight home is at 11, correct? I've taken the liberty of upgrading you to first class again, and a representative will meet you at the airport to ensure you have no issues with check-in or security. After finishing the call and completing her checkout, Tasha headed to the airport with mixed feelings. The company's response was encouraging, far more than she had expected. But she was also aware that one conversation, no matter how well-intentioned, wouldn't solve the deeper issues at play. When Tasha arrived at the airport, a young man in a National Airlines uniform was waiting for her near the entrance, holding a small sign with her name. He greeted her warmly, apologized for her previous experience, and guided her smoothly through check-in and security. The process was efficient, respectful, and utterly different from her experience just a day before. As Tasha settled into her first-class seat, she opened her laptop to check her email one last time before takeoff. Her inbox was flooded with notifications about her post, including several messages from journalists asking to discuss her experience. The last email she read before stowing her laptop was from Diane at Meridian Investors, confirming their investment in her marketing strategy and adding a personal note. Your voice is powerful, Tasha. I read your post. Thank you for having the courage to share that experience. It matters. As the plane took off, lifting into the clear blue sky, Tasha gazed out the window and reflected on the unexpected turns the past 24 hours had taken. What had begun as a humiliating experience had somehow transformed into something else entirely. A catalyst for conversation, a platform for change, a moment of unexpected solidarity. The journey wasn't over. The conversations with airline leadership still lay ahead. The systemic issues that had led to her treatment were deeply entrenched and wouldn't be solved by one viral post or one meeting. But something had shifted, both within Tasha herself and in the world around her. By standing firm in that airport, by documenting and sharing her experience, she had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for awareness and change. That, she decided as Chicago's skyline receded beneath the clouds, was a different kind of victory, one just as meaningful as her professional success with Meridian. 3 weeks had passed since Tasha's trip to Chicago. The memory of that tense morning at the airport had begun to fade, overshadowed by the success of the Meridian deal and the flurry of activity it had generated at her office. Her team was energized, working at full speed to implement the marketing strategy that had so impressed the investors. Her boss had given her a substantial bonus and hinted at a possible promotion. By all accounts, life had moved on. Except that it hadn't. Not entirely. Tasha's social media post had continued to gain traction, spreading far beyond her own network. It had been shared by several prominent civil rights accounts, featured in a news segment about bias in customer service, and even included in a college course on modern discrimination. The comments section had become a space where hundreds of people shared similar experiences, creating an impromptu community united by common frustrations and a desire for change. The most surprising development, however, had been National Airlines' response. True to her word, Patricia Reynolds, the senior vice president, had organized a meeting with Tasha soon after her return. What Tasha had expected to be a brief, perfunctory discussion had turned into a 3-hour conversation with Reynolds, Raymond Chen, and the company's Director of Diversity and Inclusion, a thoughtful woman named Dr. Kimberly West. They had listened, really listened, as Tasha described not just the incident itself, but the broader context that made it so hurtful. How it connected to a lifetime of similar moments, small and large. How exhausting it was to constantly navigate spaces where your presence was viewed with suspicion rather than welcome. How the action of being publicly accused carried echoes of historical injustices that couldn't be separated from the present moment. To Tasha's surprise, no one had become defensive. No one had tried to explain away what had happened or minimize its impact. Instead, they had asked questions, taken notes, and shared their own organization's data that confirmed what Tasha already knew, that such incidents weren't isolated, but part of a pattern that affected many travelers. Now, 3 weeks later, Tasha was back at the airline's headquarters for a follow-up meeting. As she waited in the sleek reception area, she wondered what, if anything, had come from their previous conversation. She'd heard stories before of companies making grand promises in the heat of public scrutiny, only to quietly return to business as usual once the spotlight moved elsewhere. Ms. Wilson, a young assistant, appeared at her side. "They're ready for you now." Tasha was led to a conference room where she found not just Reynolds, Chen, and Dr. West, but several other people she hadn't met before. Reynolds stood to greet her. "Tasha, thank you for coming back. We have some updates to share that we thought you might appreciate hearing in person." As everyone settled around the table, Reynolds introduced the newcomers, the head of training and development, the customer experience director, and somewhat to Tasha's surprise, Zoe, the young employee who had helped her at the airport. "First," Reynolds began, "I want to share that both Paul and Linda are no longer with the company." She held up a hand as Tasha started to respond. "This wasn't solely because of your incident, though it was certainly a factor. A review of their service record showed multiple complaints of similar behavior toward other passengers of color." Tasha nodded, processing this information. While she hadn't set out to get anyone fired, she wasn't particularly sorry to hear that the two employees who had treated her so poorly were no longer in positions to do the same to others. "But we recognize that this isn't just about individual employees," Reynolds continued. "It's about systems and culture, which is why we've implemented several changes that Dr. West will explain." Dr. West opened a folder in front of her. "Following our conversation with you and a broader audit of customer complaints, we've developed a comprehensive training program addressing unconscious bias for all customer-facing staff." She slid a document across the table to Tasha. "This isn't just a one-time sensitivity training. It's an ongoing program with regular refreshers and real performance metrics tied to inclusive customer service." Tasha skimmed the document, impressed by its thoroughness. It wasn't the superficial approach she had half expected, but something with real substance. "Additionally," Dr. West continued, "we've revised our escalation procedures for any disputes at check-in or boarding. Staff are now required to involve a supervisor immediately if there's any question about documentation, and all such incidents are automatically recorded for review." The meeting continued, with each person sharing specific changes being implemented, from revisions to the customer service handbook to modifications in the mobile app to prevent the technical glitch that had contributed to Tasha's situation. "And finally," Reynolds said, "we'd like to offer you a role as a consultant on our customer experience advisory board. It would involve quarterly meetings where you and other members provide feedback on our policies and practices from a diverse range of perspectives. It's a paid position, of course." Tasha raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. "I appreciate that, but I'm quite busy with my marketing role, especially with the new Meridian project." "We understand," Reynolds nodded. "But we value the perspective you brought to our attention. You helped us see blind spots in our approach that we might have missed otherwise. If you can't commit to the full board role, perhaps you'd consider reviewing some of our new training materials." Before Tasha could respond, Zoe spoke up. "If I may add something?" At Reynolds' nod, she continued, looking directly at Tasha. "After what happened with you, I started paying more attention to how different passengers were being treated. I began documenting incidents where I saw disparities. It wasn't just you, it was happening regularly, in small ways that added up to a pattern." Zoe turned to face the executives. "I was afraid to speak up at first, afraid for my job. But seeing Tasha stand her ground that day and then seeing her post go viral, it gave me courage. So I started collecting data, documenting what I observed. When Dr. West began her audit, I shared what I'd found. Zoe's documentation was incredibly valuable, Dr. West confirmed. It provided us with specific examples that helped shape our new policies. Tasha looked at Zoe with newfound respect. The young woman had taken a risk, using her position inside the system to push for change. It was a different kind of courage than what Tasha had shown that day at the airport, but no less important. That's why we've also created a new role, Reynolds added. Zoe has been appointed as our first inclusion ambassador within the frontline staff. She'll help implement the new training and serve as a bridge between customer service employees and management on these issues. Zoe smiled, a mix of pride and determination in her expression. I start next week. As the meeting concluded, Tasha found herself reconsidering the advisory board offer. The company's response had exceeded her expectations. They hadn't just offered empty apologies or made token gestures. They had acknowledged the problem, examined its roots, and taken concrete steps toward addressing it. I'd like to review those training materials, Tasha said to Reynolds as they walked out. And I'll think about the advisory board. My schedule is tight, but this work matters. Reynolds nodded. It does matter. And your voice has been instrumental in helping us recognize that. Outside the building, Tasha paused to check her phone. Among the usual work emails was a message from Diane at Meridian Investors, sharing the preliminary results from the first phase of the marketing campaign. The numbers were excellent, exceeding even their optimistic projections. As Tasha scrolled through the report, a notification appeared, another comment on her viral post. These had become less frequent as the weeks passed, but they hadn't stopped entirely. This one was from a young woman who wrote about standing up to biased treatment at her university. After reading Tasha's story, "You helped me find my voice," she'd written. "Thank you," Tasha smiled, pocketing her phone as she walked toward her car. When she'd posted about her experience that night in the Chicago hotel room, she hadn't expected it to resonate with so many people, or to spark meaningful changes at national airlines. She had simply needed to speak her truth, to transform a painful experience into something more than just another indignity to be silently absorbed. What had begun as one of the most frustrating mornings of her professional life had somehow become a catalyst for corporate policy changes, for Zoe's new career path, for countless conversations about bias in everyday interactions, and for people finding courage in sharing their own stories. The incident itself was still wrong. It should never have happened. No policy change or corporate apology could erase the feeling of standing at that counter, being publicly accused of fraud while others sailed through unchallenged. But there was power in what had followed, in refusing to let the incident pass unremarked, in speaking up not just for herself but for all who had faced similar treatment. As Tasha drove home, she reflected on the strange journey of the past month. The successful pitch at Meridian, now blossoming into a thriving campaign. The viral post that had touched thousands of readers. The genuine efforts at reform within national airlines. Each strand woven together into something unexpected and meaningful. She thought of the young woman who had commented about finding her voice, and of Zoe stepping into a role where she could drive change from within. She thought of future travelers who might be spared the experience she had endured because of new policies and training. And she thought of her own journey, how standing firm in that moment of injustice had rippled outward in ways she couldn't have imagined. Some might call it a small victory in the face of much larger, systemic issues, but to Tasha there was nothing small about it. Change happened one conversation at a time, one policy shift at a time, one person finding their courage at a time, and in that sense, perhaps the most important outcome wasn't the viral post or the corporate response or even the successful business deal. Perhaps it was simply the reminder that speaking up mattered. That one voice, clear, truthful, and unwavering, could echo far beyond its origin, finding resonance in unexpected places and creating ripples that might, over time, become waves.